Hey everyone, welcome to the Get Your Life Together Girl podcast, the ultimate blueprint to self-love and inner peace. I'm your host, Danielle Van. As a cognitive behavioral therapist, life coach, meditation teacher, and author, I've spent my life studying and learning from the stories that make us human. It's my passion and goal to help you shift your mindset and create a lifelong revolution to help you reach your greatest potential. Expectations. Ugh. For many, that word sends shivers down their spine and makes their head begin to hurt. But the truth is, no matter where we look in life, there are expectations. It's when the expectations become a problem that we begin to build anxiety into our lives. How we deal with it can lead to our overall mindset and our life satisfaction. That's why today you and I are taking a one-on-one deep dive into expectations and high-functioning anxiety. That space where we look like we have it all together, and yet inside we can be frozen with fear and self-doubt. We're breaking it all down, and I'm giving you some tools and tips to help you win at your mindset and learn to set your own expectations while dealing with any form of anxiety. So let's not waste another second. The Get Your Life Together Girl podcast starts right now. If I had to come up with what most brings people into my office, it would be three things. One would be trauma, obviously. The second would be expectations, not living up to other people's standards, this people-pleasing aspect, which often comes from trauma, but sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes it's literally built into the system of our families, and we struggle. And the last one is anxiety. So I wanted to break down how expectations and anxiety go hand in hand and how we can identify what this anxiety really looks like in our lives, especially if we have high functioning anxiety. I see this so much with high performing women and men, but mostly women. And I want to break this down because there is a way to get ahead of it. There's ways to look at, am I trying to be a perfectionist, or am I really experiencing something that in some ways is highly productive and in other ways extremely challenging for my mindset, for my emotional body, for just my overall functioning behavior in life. So let's start with what an expectation is. I'm going to give you the traditional definition, and then I want to give you my definition, the definition that I teach in private session, and the definition that I really use in my own personal life to measure whether or not I am trying to meet other people's expectations and not living within my own standard. So the traditional definition of expectation is a strong belief that something will happen or be the case in the future. It's a belief that someone will or should achieve something. So that's the expectation. There's a much older definition of expectation that I really love, and there's a reason why. Let me give you the definition, and then I'm going to tell you why I love it so much. But it's one's prospect of inheritance. I love this definition because it's the inheritance, whether that is financial or behavioral or mindset or whatever. It's what I'm bringing in and owning as mine. Now, my personal definition of expectations is a bit different, and it's a bit more self-serving, if you will. We have expectations because we want something to go a certain way, that inheritance piece. We want someone to show up the way that we would. And that's really the definition of expectations that I want to put out there, because if we think from this mindset that I expect for you to do as I would do for you, you can understand how anxiety can come from expectations. I want something to be a certain way, but it's not fully likely because that means that you're going to show up the way that I would. And let's be honest, unless somebody has a full manual of how you would do something, it's not likely that they're going to. And so when we can't get there, when we can't live from balanced expectations, we get into a space of anxiety, especially high functioning anxiety. Remember that anxiety is about forecasting an outcome. It's trying to be in all of the pieces of a situation, a feeling, a thought process without all of the information. Expectations, anxiety, they go hand in hand. And then it can move into a space of high functioning anxiety. So we have the expectation piece. Let's talk about how high functioning anxiety shows up, some signs, some feelings that we feel, some strengths of high functioning anxiety and the challenges. And then let's talk about how we can get over it and what the other causes are other than expectations. So let's talk about what high functioning anxiety really is. And let's be honest, it's a catchphrase, a catch-all term that refers to people who have anxiety, but identify as functioning reasonably well in their life, right? Like there's not anything terribly wrong. They have the ability to appear successful and together and calm. It's usually those people that we say have type A personalities. I'm doing air quotes. I wish you could see, right? They have these personality traits of really being high achievers. They're organized. They're calm, cool, and collected, and yet they're also overthinkers. They need constant reassurance. They are often told, you're really difficult to read. And those are some signs of high functioning anxiety. It's these people who see expectations in front of them. They want to meet them. They'll do everything they can to get there, to read this invisible manual that we're just talking about. And yet inside, they're sort of frozen with this fear of not being good enough. And they appear very successful, but they are very objective in the way that they measure their success, because it usually only comes in small drips of achievement. At work, it's those people that are desperately fearful of taking a day off because they don't want anyone to know that there's something wrong, or they don't want to feel a sense of failure or that they're going to disappoint someone. They, in their personal life, are willing to help others at the cost of themselves. They're afraid of driving people away. They'll take on the bad friendships. They'll have a social schedule that's so full and so busy that there is no space of rest. This is really the face of high functioning anxiety. It's also the face of expectation. It's the face of people pleasing. And I say all of this and it sounds very negative, but high functioning anxiety actually has a bit of a benefit too. I've said many times on the podcast that not all anxiety is bad. Not all stress is bad. Not every negative emotion is bad. We want to look at some of the potential benefits, and let's talk about those characteristics. These are really outgoing personalities. They're happy. They tell jokes. They smile. They're punctual. They'll always arrive on time or early for appointments. They're proactive, so they love to plan ahead and take on all the possibilities. Again, remember that anxiety itself is trying to forecast the outcome. So that looks like positive proactiveness. These are people who are organized and they're high achieving, detail oriented, orderly and tidy. They're active and helpful. Outwardly, they're calm, cool, and collective. They're passionate, and they are loyal in relationships. And yet the challenges can all be the exact same. In the case of high-functioning anxiety, there's this struggle that happens below the veil of success, where we feel like it's never going to be good enough. There's this struggle of being a people pleaser, being afraid to drive people away, fear of being a bad friend and spouse and employee, fear of letting other people down. They talk a lot. It's this nervous chatter of never being able to, know when to allow someone to speak or when someone should earn their trust or earn them as a human. It's playing with their hair or biting their lip, having these nervous habits, these tics. They tend to overthink. They lose time by arriving to appointments too early. They need constant reassurance. They ask for things multiple times. They check in on others frequently. They need to know that they're wanted and needed. They will procrastinate, followed by long periods of crunch time, trying to get everything together. They avoid eye contact a lot of times. They ruminate. The what ifs really own them. They dwell on the past. They have an inability to say no and are always overloaded in the schedule. They have insomnia a lot of times because they have a hard time shutting their brain off so that they could sleep. Or they are woken up with the thought processes of constant chatter. Their mind races. They have difficulty slowing down. They can be read as unemotional or cold. Others may want to limit them in their space because they have a hard time enjoying the moment. They can also feel intimidated by the future. They can have mental and physical fatigue. They're loyal to a fault. And they also fall really easily into alcohol and substance abuse because they use that as a coping mechanism. Let's take a break from the conversation for just a second and move into something that's super important to talk about, and that's a safety mechanism versus a coping mechanism. And there is a difference. So let's break those down really quickly because it has everything to do with both of these things, expectations and anxiety. So a safety mechanism are the behaviors, the thoughts, the feelings that you use to keep yourself safe. This looks different for every single person. Some people will actually use stress as a safety mechanism. It's anything that can really help us get through the mental ups and downs of our lives. It's a space that nurtures us, that helps us feel okay and gives us a sense of balance. So think about this. What are some of your safety mechanisms? For some people, it is going out for a long run so that they can process their emotions. That's a safety mechanism. Some people, it's boundaries that are hard and fast. Some people, it is physical distance. It just depends on what it looks like for you. Then we have coping mechanisms. And our coping mechanisms kick in when our safety mechanisms have failed. When we do not feel like we have safety, trust, where we do not feel okay mentally, physically, emotionally, our coping mechanisms are the things that help us process and soothe that psychological feeling of stress or the distress or the lack of balance. So when we know that, we can also look at how do these play into our high functioning anxiety. If we look at the causes of high functioning anxiety and we know that expectations fall into some of those safety mechanisms and that we go to our coping mechanisms, we can look at how everything pulls together and we can say, where does the cause, the root of some of the high functioning anxiety come from? One, we know not being able to meet other people's needs, the expectation. Two, when there's a failure of safety. Three, when there's stress at home or work or in any environment. When there's physical and mental health issues, abuse, trauma and neglect, bullying, relationship problems, divorce, finances, caretaker or caregiver burnout, emotional burnout, physical burnout, the death of a loved one. In so many cases, you may not even know the source of the anxious feelings. And that's when I say, hey, go get some help, right? We know that these feelings are happening, but it's hard. You also have to understand that getting help for high functioning anxiety is sort of a double-edged sword, because you don't want to lose that positive influence of the anxiety, the good things, right? But we also don't want to live in that space of disruption. It's really hard. I will tell you, for many years, I lived in that space. I remember thinking, if I let go of this nervousness, this drive, I will not be as successful. And in some cases, that's true. In other cases, it's an absolute false. So it depends on how we're using that anxiety. Getting rid of it or getting help for it may actually be hard because you won't feel as driven in some places. Again, that's okay. Let's talk about different ways to cope with expectations and high functioning anxiety. Let's start with the expectations, knowing that they often lead us into the anxiety piece. So if we cut it off at the expectation part, we may be able to deal with the anxiety on its own, right? So expectations. First part is take responsibility of what is yours. What belongs to me? I think I've mentioned this in other episodes, but for me, I often do a list of to-dos. It's a to-do list that is broken into two pieces, mine and theirs. These are the things that I write down that are self-assigned. They're mine. And theirs are the things that people have asked me to do for them, or they've handed over to me as my responsibility. And it may not be my responsibility, may not be the thing that I want to do. Now, whether I've agreed to it or not, it still goes into their category. So what's my responsibility? And not bowing into other people's expectations, right? So that's one. It's also creating clear expectations of avoiding uncertainty, getting to know what you can and cannot do. The next piece is to avoid manipulating the situation for your own benefit, for other people's benefit, being that you are the one being manipulated. So looking at, again, responsibility, what works, what doesn't. It's also not worrying about disappointing people, because no matter what you do, there is going to be a factor that could lead to disappointment, period. Right? If you don't meet somebody's expectation, there is a disappointment factor somewhere, somehow. It's also being curious. Be curious about why other people have expectations of you or for you or about you. What is it? Asking those discovery questions, asking those qualified questions. What is it? And decide what value you want others to have of you. Is it that you want to be known as a doormat? Of course you don't. Of course that's not what you want other people to think about you. But if you're always bending and giving more than you can actually give, guess what? That's often what people think. It's what they perceive of you. So being able to practice flexibility. Start with, how does this impact me? Am I willing to manage this expectation? Am I willing to do the work that works for me and then others that is necessary? It's also practicing compassion, knowing that you're holding unhealthy thoughts, feelings, and even behaviors. So if we can't get the expectations under control, and we begin to lean into anxiety and then high functioning anxiety, how can we reduce those feelings, reduce the outcomes that they produce in our lives, and get into a space where we're healing and coping in a much healthier and more grounded way? So I want to give you a few things, tools, if you will. So the first one is to begin to commit to spending 10 minutes, that's it, a day, working on your mental health. Maybe that's journaling. Maybe that's some breath work. Maybe that is doing a bit of meditation. Whatever it is, it's focused, it's centered, and it's working to alleviate or calm down these feelings of not having yourself grounded and centered. The next thing is to really look at your lifestyle. What are things that need to change? If you're somebody who drinks a lot of caffeine, whether that's coffee or soda, you are likely to experience much more anxiety. We've learned over the last few years the imperative nature of having a healthy gut. Your gut biome is so important. Our stomachs are now really becoming this second brain. They've even been called that in some scientific journals that send all of these signals to our brain. So if our gut isn't healthy, our mental health isn't either. So what lifestyle changes from eating healthy to regular exercise, reducing caffeine and sugar, do you need to make? Because before we do any cognitive work, we also need to know if there's outside sources causing the anxiety, other than expectations, other than our coping mechanisms, other than our safety mechanisms, and even just some of our behaviors. These are important things that need to be looked at. And we also have to look at our sleep hygiene. This is important too, because sticking to a regular bedtime, not staying up all night because your mind is racing, has everything to do with your anxiety. Once we've done some of that, we're willing to commit 10 minutes a day. You have 10 minutes a day. If you will trade some of the cheap dopamine that you're getting from scrolling on TikTok or scrolling Instagram or Reels or YouTube or whatever it is, for just 10 minutes a day, you're going to see a huge change in your anxiety. If you will look at your lifestyle and also commit to a sleep habit, it's here that we can begin to look at some of our thought patterns. If your anxiety involves a lot of negative predictions, like what if I don't make the deadline? Or what if I look like an idiot when I do this? You can look at how this thought pattern is really impacting you. Are you setting yourself up for failure before you even get to a space of being able to fail? Generally, yes. Because you've worked yourself up so much that your hands are shaking, you're stuttering, you can't handle yourself because the thought is, I am going to fail. Where you let your mind go is where everything else follows. And so you really have to look at this. Is this where I want to be? When you notice a negative thought, counter it with something far more realistic, something more helpful. I'm not going to make the deadline. I'm going to fail. No, I always make my deadlines. I've never missed one the entire time that I've worked at this job. So it's not likely that I'm going to. Or, no, I've never gotten on stage and fainted. Or I've never missed this or that. I've always done it. So there's no way that this one time I'm going to create this mess. And then from there, find the coping strategy to ease everything. Think about breathing. Think about the progressive muscle relaxation, where maybe you tense your shoulders really tight, pulling your shoulder blades together, and then with a really good inhale on your exhale, you let it go. You soften those shoulders. You give yourself the coping skill, the strategy that allows your body to calm down. You can also listen to that inner dialogue and ask yourself, why is this thought there? What can I do with this thought? What is it trying to show me? How can I acknowledge it? And then move forward. There's another tool that I absolutely love. It is a grounding exercise. It's the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 exercise. And this allows you to focus on your present surroundings while distracting yourself from the anxiety that is trying to own you. It also helps you study your breath. So it looks like this. I've done this before on Instagram for you if you follow me there. or I think I've talked about it here on the podcast. The first step is to acknowledge 5 things that you see around you, 5 objects. So in the studio, I see a lamp, that's 1. I see a clipboard, that's 2. I see a bulletin board, that's 3. I see my mic, that's 4. And I see a cute, cuddly dog at my feet. So those are 5 things. Acknowledging those 5 things brings my mind into the present moment. It's taking me away from the anxiety that I'm feeling and bringing me into my actual surroundings. It also makes me slow my breath down because I know that everywhere I look, I am safe. From there, we're going to go to 4. So we just did the 5. And then the 4 are 4 things that I can reach out and touch or reach. So I'm touching my mic. I'm touching the dog. I'm touching the lamp. I'm even touching my keyboard. We're going to go to 3, which is to acknowledge 3 sounds that we hear. I hear the small buzz of the monitor. I hear the snore of the dog. I hear voices in the distance. Then we go to 2, and this is 2 things that I'm able to smell. I smell the sweet smell of puppy, and I smell leftover lunch. Then we go to 1, and that's something that you can taste, whatever that might be. This is a beautiful grounding technique that helps us bring ourselves down and look at how we are feeling and how that is impacting what is happening around us. We can also remember that thoughts are just thoughts. You're the one who puts the truth behind them. They're not necessarily negative or positive until you validate them. It's okay to lean in and know that my thoughts are making me feel a certain way. That's what self-awareness is all about. Then we can practice non-attachment. We don't have to attach to everything that comes into the mind. We don't have to be triggered into creating an outcome that doesn't work. When we're thinking about anxiety in both positive and negative terms, we can also look at the stamina of the anxiety. What's happening? How long is it lasting? What do I need to do with this? Again, all of these things are double-edged swords because it can work for you or it can work against you. If you can look at expectations, you can look at the anxiety and recognize the symptoms for what they are. Why do I feel this way? What is happening around me? And then make friends with the fear, because anxiety and fear are besties, right? It motivates us. It can also cripple us. Anxiety can't be ignored or pretended away most of the time. And so we have to stop and look at fear in the face. Rather than feeding it with more stress and anxiety, work to understand where it is coming from. And once you begin to understand it, the fear is less scary. And it helps you make a critical connection based on what I'm doing, why I'm doing it, and how I'm doing it, right? That's the most important part. And then you can connect with your body. Anxiety is as much physical as it is mental. And people with high functioning anxiety tend to live in their heads. They tend to live in there. It's a hard place to be sometimes. But they spend 10 to 12 hours a day really stuck in these cycles. And then they say, I'm stuck in life. But you need to remember that just because you're busy or overwhelmed doesn't mean that life is stuck. What can you do to reconnect to your body and get into a space of understanding what's going on? I had an expectation. I couldn't meet it. Therefore, I have anxiety. I'm functioning well in many other areas, but this nervous energy doesn't feel good. That's understanding. That's connecting to your body. You can even have a mantra and use it every day. This is something that I teach people who come in with me. I post mantras all the time on social media. There's a reason for this. It's that I've learned that if you talk back to your fear cannot control the inner conversation. Ugh, hear that again. If you talk back to your fear, the fear cannot control your inner conversation. Develop a few phrases that you can use as the slapback. Who I am right now is good enough for me. I am doing my best. I'm not perfect, and I love that about myself. I deserve to take good care of myself. I don't have to be perfect. I can be empowered. I am empowered. This is what the opportunity to practice self-care is all about. I choose me. I choose my inner voice. I choose to take care of how I am showing up. Learn to intervene with the self. Anxiety feeds off of anxiety. It's a snowball that rolls downhill and takes you down. So once you identify it, you can intervene. When I'm having a hard time personally making a decision, I will ask other people their thoughts. I'm not looking for validation. I'm looking for another piece of the conversation that I may be missing. Do that. Intervene. I don't have an answer. I don't have a solution, so I'm going to ask questions. That's an intervention. You can use a timer. Write down everything that you need to write down in 10 minutes and 20 minutes. And when the timer goes off, it's a hard, firm stop. It's a way to hold yourself accountable and look at what you have to deal with. When you're learning to moderate and change and intervene your own emotions, anxiety is a key thing that comes in. So take a moment. Understand it, intervene. It's powerful. Then create your support system, whether that is a therapist or your best friends, people that you feel comfortable with. It doesn't matter who it is. Who is your A-team? Who's the person that's going to help you get the best results? Who's going to look at you and say your expectations are through the roof and so is your anxiety, and the two are linked? Just because you are functioning well in other things doesn't mean that you're functioning well in everything. Use your skill set to your advantage. It's really important to understand that generally all of this comes back to the struggle inside of yourself that says, I'm going to let somebody down. I'm going to screw this up. I'm going to limit myself 1.5 million times because that's what I'm used to doing and that feels safest. Understand. You can have all of it together and still struggle. You can have it all together and call yourself a really great person and still struggle. So if you're dealing with self-doubt or overthinking or that fear, experiencing the racing thoughts, or you're triggered, understand there's more to it. What is the expectation? Get down to it. And how is it causing you to show up? When you figure that out, I promise you, so much changes. You're able to look at the what if, the whys, the hows, and change the conversation. And if you can do that, you're essentially getting everything together. I hope you now understand that when something occurs, you must look at the expectation. And when you feel like you can't meet the expectation, that anxiety is the next normal reaction. If you deal with that all day long, you're likely living with high-functioning anxiety. The tools that I gave you are just a few, just a drop in the bucket of what you can be using. Some very simple things, some very simple processes, but there's so much more. So get the help that you need if that's what you're dealing with, because no one deserves to live in constant stress and negative impacts. You're better than that. It's okay. If you can get past that, you essentially find a path to best serve yourself. And you do deserve that. Thank you so much for listening to the Get Your Life Together Girl podcast. If you've enjoyed these tips for bettering your life, please subscribe and turn on notifications to be alerted each week when a new episode is released. I would also love for you to leave a review on the platform of your choice, as it really helps us grow and spread this message to those who may need it. If you're looking for daily inspiration or want to continue the conversation and you're not following me on social media, go ahead and head over to Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, Clapper, or even Threads, and follow at Get Your Life Together Girl. You can also visit my website at getyouurlifetogethergirl.com, where you'll find the show notes and so much more. Once again, thank you for being a valuable part of this community. Until next time, be kind to yourself and others.